US investors are cheering the resumption of trade talks between the world's two largest economies. Stock prices have seen their sharpest increase in 2 weeks after US President Donald Trump announced he'll be meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping in Osaka later this month.
We'll be meeting at the G20, and I think that is working out pretty much as I anticipated it would. China very much wants to discuss the future, and so do we. So the relationship with President Xi is a very good one.
Negotiations stalled in May when President Trump accused China of reneging on a draft deal. Washington then slapped a 25% tariff on another $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Beijing responded with similar levies on American goods worth $60 billion. US officials say recent steps taken by Beijing to curb the theft of intellectual property and stop forced technology transfers are insufficient. They want China to guarantee compliance through new laws and introduce punitive measures that would kick in if Beijing fails to implement the promised changes. But Chinese officials say Washington's demands constitute bullying and it won't be intimidated.
The most important thing in the consultation process is to address each other's reasonable concerns in a balanced way and find a solution acceptable to both sides. If this principle is violated, there's no way out.
For now, investors are happy negotiations have resumed, but with so many disputed issues, few expect a quick resolution. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, Max Wolff joins us now from New York. He's the managing partner at the capital markets research firm Multivariate. Welcome back to Money Talks, Max. Now, Donald Trump really didn't give Xi Jinping a choice, did he, but to meet him, because he threatened to hit China with more tariffs if he didn't. I'm wondering, do you think this meeting at the G20 summit could signal the beginning of the end of their trade war?
So great to be here. Look, I think it could be a positive step. I think expectations about this trade meeting have gotten way ahead of likely realities. Also, I think Donald Trump did a very smart piece of media grandstanding more than a negotiating tactic. Once everyone had already heard that Xi Jinping was going to the meeting, Donald Trump got on TV and said he'd better go to the meeting. I'm demanding he be there, which is much easier to do when the other party is guaranteed in advance to be there. It looks good to do that, I guess, to some of his base. I do think it's always very positive when the trade negotiators get back to the table, which they have, and I think that the meeting gives a chance for both the governments to make announcements their publics and their economies would love to hear, which is that at very least there's progress. A real solution, I think, is almost impossible to assume would come out of this, but we may hear an announcement of progress. And then I would also caution people, it seems strange that about 50 times out of 50, what the president says on Twitter and then what happens later are not connected, but somehow when you want to believe something, you always do. It would be nice if it were true, but I'm not sure we should be seeing as infallible the tweets of the president at any given moment on any given subject.
Right. Now, Donald Trump maintains that he's in no hurry to resolve this trade dispute, claiming that China is more desperate for a deal than the US is. Do you agree with that assessment?
Very, very hard to know. I don't think it's a China versus America thing. I think that that's the frame, unfortunately, that people discuss this. There are parties in the United States that are really suffering, including some of our farmers who are very anxious to see the best possible deal and the earliest possible deal. And then there are other parties in the United States who are actually benefited by these trade sanctions and the tariffs and trade restrictions. And so they're hoping to see this last as long as possible. I know the same is true in China as well. I would say one thing, though, the longer various tariffs and punitive measures stay in effect, the more the world economy shifts around old patterns of trade and old trading partners, and the deeper and more permanent the dislocation. So I think overall, we are all better off with the most possibly fast and complete resolution to this, as opposed to a bunch of PR announcements which signal progress, but very limited progress, as opposed to any major breakthrough.
Yes, now we've got yet another set of public hearings that are currently underway in Washington, D.C. to hear from various stakeholders as to whether or not they support more tariffs on Chinese goods. Now, the US business community, or much of the business community, is pretty much united in opposing this trade war. Why isn't Donald Trump listening to them?
Well, Donald Trump also officially announced his campaign for re-election last night in Florida, and he's very much a candidate. He's probably seemed to be more engaged and interested in being a candidate sometimes than making all the normal gesticulations and decisions of a sort of average presidency. He's given to the spectacle, quite good at it, and quite comfortable in the spotlight. So I think he likes the big, brashy announcements. I mean, generally speaking, America has staked its prosperity and global reputation on being a pretty aggressive free trade opponent for the last 7 months, and that's popular with Trump's base, but most American business interests are more familiar with America as the big trade proponent and advocate for free trade, which has defined our history really since the 70s, if not longer.
Yes, and yet the data coming out of the US economy are looking pretty rosy. You've got positive employment figures, you've also got reasonably good growth figures. Do you think this is why Donald Trump feels emboldened to behave the way he is when it comes to China?
I'm not sure. He's behaved that way over the last few months, even as things have clearly slowed here. And I think President screaming that the Federal Reserve Board president, chairman will be removed if he doesn't slash interest rates, despite the fact they're still low, is saying in that statement that the economy can't survive unless it has accommodative monetary policy, while in other statements saying that the economy is doing great. I do think much of the world is in worse economic shape right now than the U.S., but our long expansion looks like it's kind of coming to an end. I don't think the road up ahead need be super difficult, but it could be. And I do think the sort of rosiest halcyon days here in the U.S. are probably behind us. We're in for a bit of a slowdown, and I would be one of the people who think it may have already begun.
Meanwhile, there are signs that he may be interested in starting another type of war, this time with currencies. He lashed out at the lower euro after ECB chief Mario Draghi announced that he could stimulate the Eurozone economy in the coming months. Do you think that's something that we should be looking out for?
Could be. I mean, most of the wisdom is that if we do get something like an interim resolution with China, that the focus will quickly turn possibly to the European Union and to Germany as a sort of trade opponent. I think, look, Donald Trump's whole career politically on all subjects is about defining opposition and railing against them and building a cohort of a group of people who either just like to watch other people fight or feel like he's somehow carrying the torch for their fights. So no matter how this thing goes with China, he'll announce it's a huge success. He does that after everything, no matter how it goes, and he'll pick the next fight. So the only real dime is in figuring out when he makes those decisions. And to some extent, it's not 100% clear that he knows when he'll make those decisions in advance or that he has a clear and consistent set of criteria. We do hope, against all odds sometimes, and with the odds hopefully now, that we are closer every day to a meaningful agreement with China that allows the world to move forward, because it's also a global game when the number one, number two economy are at odds and are both sort of turning away from the free trade scaffolding that has built a lot of the global prosperity that we've come to expect and enjoy over the last couple decades.
Okay, Max Wolff in New York, always a pleasure. Thank you.